Hi. Sorry for any delay. We're so pleased to have you all here tonight. And two groups from this church, the Community for Earth and the Animal Ministry, are partnered with the leadership of Northwest Veg to co-sponsor this informative event. You are here because you found the topic interesting of how to do less harm to the world. We hear increasing evidence brought to us daily about how things are rapidly changing. The stability of what has been taken for granted for thousands of years is no longer predictable. We're urged to see this crisis as a management issue caused by our institutions, our government, and the behavior of our economic system. In other words, something external from us as individuals. If we're each truly concerned about our shared future, we carry a personal responsibility to find ways to individually participate in finding solutions. We need to feel that we're working together in hope, with each of us actively engaged. If you find that you are of like mind in hearing this presentation, please take a look at our tabling literature and consider visiting our two church-sponsored groups here. Community for Earth meets every second Sunday morning, and Animal Ministry meets every fourth Sunday afternoon. Northwest Veg, the people who bring us the annual Portland Veg Fest, also has lots more going on and would love your participation. After the talk, please join us in the adjacent chanting room for food and conversation. And now I'm pleased to welcome the Executive Director of Northwest Veg, Jacqueline Leeds, to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thanks so much for coming, and it's always such a pleasure to get to partner with Community for Earth and Animal Ministry and work with Keith. This is the perfect precursor for Science Fest tomorrow in Portland. And I'm so pleased that we have Dr. Julie Sinistore here tonight to talk to you about her work on life cycle assessments. Dr. Sinistore has a PhD in biological systems engineering as well as an MS in agroecology from University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as a BS in natural resource management from Rutgers University. And she's taught courses in life cycle thinking and sustainable product design at UC Berkeley, as well as conducting life cycle assessments on products and services for other companies. After you listen to Julie's compelling presentation this evening, I want to urge you to contact your local senator about a bill that's currently passed the House and waiting to go to vote in the Senate. You might have heard about House Bill 3342A, which, I'm getting nods, would bring plant-based meals to hospitals, prisons, and other facilities. And as I mentioned, it's already passed the House, and the Senate was supposed to vote on its passage, but opposition is stalling it. And if you're not on Northwest Veg's mailing list, you can join that by going to northwestveg.org, and we'll be sending out an email with information on how to contact your local senator to urge them to put this to vote. And last thing, I'm really pleased that Dr. Sinistore will also be speaking at Portland Veg Fest this year, which is October 5th and 6th. So hopefully we will see you back with Julie then. Without further ado, thanks.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. As she said, I'm Dr. Julie Sinistore. It's funny, I don't like calling myself doctor sometimes, but it's useful. I'm here to talk to you today about a variety of topics. First off, we're going to talk about, who am I and why should you listen to me other than my long list of degrees. I have some other things. And also, what do I do and how is that relevant to what we're talking about today? Why does food matter in terms of environmental sustainability? Some science, because I'm a scientist and I love science, and then some reflection and discussion, and I hope that that leads to questions, and we can take questions at the end here and also continue it on as we enjoy some lovely snacks. So, why listen to me? Well, other than the fact that I have a bunch of degrees, I have been doing something called life cycle assessment, which I'm going to explain in detail what that is, but I've been doing it for 12 years now, since I was in graduate school at UW-Madison. I know the picture's a little small, but does anyone know who I'm standing next to in that picture? Nerd points for you. That is Dr. Stephen Chu, former Secretary of Energy and Nobel Prize winner, also one of my nerd heroes. I I was able to meet him and have a discussion with him because of what I did for my graduate research, which was life cycle assessment of cellulosic ethanol. That's ethanol made from grass, essentially, just not grains. And he was the head of the Department of Energy then, and the Department of Energy funded the Great Lakes Bioenergy Research Center, which is where I did my work when I was at UW-Madison. So that's why I got to meet him actually the day before I defended my PhD. So after that, I went on to continue working in life cycle assessment for a private company called Virent. They do still exist. Back in Wisconsin, they make technology for bio-based fuels and chemicals. So essentially making gasoline that's chemically identical to petroleum-based gasoline, but making it out of plants. So I conducted life cycle assessments for them. And then I worked for a company called ThinkStep that makes a software called Gabby. And the reason that's relevant is all this company does is life cycle assessment, and the software, that's what it's for, is for life cycle assessment. And so from there, I went from just doing biofuels and biochemicals and stuff like that to doing all kinds of consumer products. So still in the agriculture realm, I was looking at food products and textiles and wood products. Then I also got to branch out to electronics, construction products, consumer products, yoga mats, I mean, you name it. I probably have done an LCA related to it. And then finally, I now work for a company called WSP. I continue to do life cycle assessment. As she mentioned, I also taught courses at UC Berkeley when I still lived in the Bay Area on life cycle thinking and sustainable product design. So how do we use different environmental assessment tools to improve the sustainability of the products that are being designed by mechanical engineers who graduate from UC Berkeley. And and now I'm here in the Portland area. I still work for WSP, and I work with all kinds of clients. Now I don't just work on their products, I actually also get to work on their corporate sustainability. So how do they use the choices that they make in order to improve the overall sustainability of their products, their services, and the world. So, life cycle assessment, that's what I do. It's abbreviated LCA. Life cycle assessment is a systematic scientific method for summing up all of the environmental benefits and burdens from production, use, transportation, and disposal of a good or a service. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you start with resources. That could be something you extract from the ground, like iron ore, or it could be something you extract from the air, like nitrogen, to make nitrogen fertilizer, or something you extract from the water, like the water itself, or something that's in the water. You take those materials, another example is petroleum, and you turn that into an intermediate product, usually. So petroleum could be turned into plastic. As I said, the nitrogen could be turned into fertilizer. The iron ore can be turned into steel, that sort of thing. And all along the way, you've got emissions and things interacting with the environment. And then you take those intermediate materials, you've got plastic and iron and this and that and the other thing, you put them all together and you make a product like this clicker or your cell phone or this building. And that product, there's probably some intermediate transportation steps in there where products are going from one place to another to be finished. And then you end up with your product, and during its use phase, during its lifetime, it may also consume things. So this clicker, for example, consumes energy. It requires batteries. If you think about your car, throughout its lifetime, it's consuming gasoline, it needs oil and lubricants and washer fluid and new tires and all of these kinds of things that go into it in order for you to be able to use it. And then at its end of life, something happens to it. Hopefully, this clicker is properly recycled by an electronics recycler. More than likely, it's actually just going to end up in a landfill. Maybe not this specific one, but most of them. And what are the environmental impacts of that? Or maybe it would be properly recycled, maybe it would be incinerated, maybe it would get a second life, all of that sort of thing. So all along the way, you've got emissions to the air, emissions to water, and emissions to soil from all of these activities. You're burning fuels, there's emissions to air. You're putting stuff in a landfill, that's an emission to soil. Let's say there's some sort of chemical washing, like in paper production or something like that, you're going to end up with emissions to probably a lake or a river. So in life cycle assessment, we add up all those emissions, and we put them into categories of environmental impact. One that you're probably familiar with is greenhouse gas emissions or global warming potential, but there are other ones like ozone depletion, so the emission of chemicals to the air that we know deplete the ozone layer. There's also ground level ozone or smog, so emissions to the air like from a tailpipe that we know contribute to smog, which is a human health impact. And there's impacts to water. You can have water consumption. You can have things that affect water by making it grow lots of algae and turn green. That's called eutrophication, and so on and so forth. So a life cycle assessment would sum up, for example, the carbon footprint of this little doohickey, right? Or the water footprint, or the water quality impacts, or the human health impacts of making and using and disposing of this particular product or any other product. So that's what it is. This is what I do on a daily basis at small and large scale, everything, like I said, from a single individual product, a food, a piece of clothing, or all of the industrial operations of Fortune 100 company X. So there's quite a range there. And the reason that this matters is what I've done over the years is collect scientifically published papers on life cycle assessment related to specifically mostly food. And I'll get into why I've tended to focus on food over the years. But what I would call this is a meta-analysis. So I've gone out and found all these studies and read them. I have to say, getting a PhD teaches you how to read scientific journal articles and understand them and digest them and put them into easily graspable, bullet points, key takeaways from the paper or the science or whatever it is. So I'm going to start off with a quick audience poll. Who knows what climate change is? Okay. Who knows that greenhouse gas emissions contribute to climate change? Awesome. Who knows what eutrophication is? Fewer. Yeah, okay. Who knows what acidification is? Good. And I think I've talked through a few of these other categories, but just want to get kind of a poll of the scientific understanding. Sometimes I talk to groups and they don't really know what climate change is, other than that thing they hear in the news that apparently is bad, or maybe it's not, they're not sure. But that's good to know. So, why does food matter? Some of you may have seen this article come out recently, actually just came out this week, that the United Nations did a report about mass species extinction on the planet. There's a lot in this report. I only pulled out just a tiny fraction of it. This actually is not a life cycle assessment, but I find it very topical because it just came out this week. But essentially, this UN report said that we're massively depleting the world's natural resource of living beings, all kinds of animals, plants, mammals, birds. This sort of mass extinction is going on, and it's not because we're going out there with a gun and shooting animals. It's all of these indirect effects of the things that we as human beings do on the planet. And one of the big things that they highlighted is agriculture and its impact on forests. So the displacement and the destruction of forest land for the creation and expansion of agricultural lands. And then the depletion of fish through overfishing, but then also other impacts, like the way that that climate change is changing ocean temperatures, the way that our fishing techniques and the sort of detritus of our fishing techniques is negatively affecting animals and their ability to survive. And then also just land use in general. So not just the conversion of land for use in agriculture, but the actual agricultural practices themselves are all contributing to this extinction. And if you notice a theme here that I teased out, there's a lot of impact from agriculture. 70% of the agriculture, it just so happens that they're talking about, is related to meat production. So you can probably guess where I'm going here. But again, why does food matter? I just created this slide again this week as well, because there's a New York Times online article and sort of a little quiz that you can take online, where you select really simply, what'd you have for breakfast, what'd you have for lunch, what'd you have for dinner, and what did you drink? And then it will tell you, based on what you eat, on an average day, and it gives you some things to pick from, your overall environmental impact from what you're eating. And they just classify it really simply from low, medium, high, and high, right? And the point of what this article is trying to say is that the majority of the negative impacts on the environment, like to climate change, are coming from the folks, especially in the United States, who are eating in that medium high to high category. So I know there's a lot of text on the slide. It's in part so that if you wanted to go back and look at it, you could see the full context. But essentially, if you look at this, even though the impacts to the total environment are roughly the same, the vast majority of people in the United States are eating in this high impact category, and that's why they're having more of an effect than the people who are eating in the lower impact category. And there's a ton of science behind this. One of the major studies that they're drawing from in order to do this calculation is a Science Journal article, which I'm actually going to give you the Cliff's Notes on in a few slides. So I'm just trying to communicate, why is it that food matters? And then finally, another reason why food matters. I love finding these little online calculators where you can calculate your personal carbon footprint or your personal ecological footprint or land footprint or whatever. And what I do is I go in and I put myself as I am today, and then I get my results, and then I go back and I only change one thing. And this is the key thing. If you don't know me already, I'm vegan. And what I do is I put in how I am today. So this calculator calculates how many Earths would it take to support all the people on the planet if they all lived like you. Lived where you do, have access to the resources that you do, the energy that you do, the food that you do, the goods, the services, everything. Now, I will admit, I'm not perfect. If everyone lived like me, it would take 2.4 Earths. Now, what I do on the other side is I go back and I change one thing. I change from vegan to a standard American diet. And if everyone on the planet lived like me and had a standard American diet, it would take almost twice as many Earths. This is why food matters. One thing, I changed one thing. And all of a sudden it takes so many more Earths to support life on this planet if everyone lived like me. Now, I'm not saying everyone does live like me, but it's a little scientific example, and I encourage you to go online and find these similar types of calculators and see what they say. Who's heard of the book Drawdown? Yes. Who's read it cover to cover? Yeah, I did. This was really just like earth-changing, world-changing for me when this book came out. I was just like, finally, someone is really putting together a comprehensive list of solutions to draw down carbon emissions in our lifetimes to avoid catastrophic climate change. And as you go through, it ranks each solution in the book by its total potential to draw down climate change in the next, I can't remember if it's 2030 or 2050, it's probably 2050. And so number one being the biggest impact thing, and number one in the book is refrigerants, things that we need to do to prevent the emission of refrigerants, because emissions from refrigerants cause a lot of climate change. Number two is offshore wind. Number three is avoiding food waste. And number four is a plant-rich diet. Number four. Now, I have to say, on a daily basis, I don't have much ability to affect refrigerants. I don't own any offshore land, so I can't exactly build offshore wind. Food waste, I can do something about, but they are talking about food waste on a really large scale. They're not talking really about, the little bit of salad or cereal you just didn't feel like you had enough room to eat that goes in the compost. They're really talking about, at the large scale, food that is not getting eaten, maybe because it's ugly, maybe because there's not a market for it, maybe because it spoils in transit, that sort of thing. They're talking about large scale food waste. And the reason they're talking about food waste as important to greenhouse gas emissions is because, not just because of the food itself that's going to rot and produce carbon and probably methane, but because of all the energy and resources and essentially greenhouse gases involved in the production of that food, all for never to be eaten, all for waste. So I really see number 3 and number 4, the plant-rich diet and the food waste, as very tightly linked, because things that we can do to improve the efficiency of our agriculture and cut down on these food wastes is highly correlated to eating lower on the food chain, essentially, to prevent a lot of that waste in the first place. Oh, and of course, the Zen master said, of all the things in this book that an individual can make choices upon every single day, in fact, 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 or 6 times a day, is what they choose to eat. There are lots of amazing other solutions in this book, like regenerative agriculture and more efficient buildings and methods of building and empowering women and girls and all of this sort of thing. But on a daily basis, one choice that you get to make that could really substantially affect this, and I'm going to provide you with some more information to support that, is what you choose to put on your plate. So, the life cycle assessment I was talking about that was behind that New York Times article, it was actually published in the journal Science. How many of you have heard of the journal Science? Okay. How many of you have heard of the International Journal of Life Cycle Assessment? Exactly. Science is high profile. It has what's called a high impact factor. It means lots of people read it, lots of people cite it, which means it's really hard to get into it. And so in order to get into it, you have to have some really groundbreaking, amazing science that either no one's ever done before or synthesizes and brings together some huge idea in a really scientifically substantial way and in a compelling way. So when I saw this article published in the journal Science, I have to say my jaw dang near hit the floor. I couldn't believe, finally, this kind of information was making it into a high-profile journal. And what it was essentially a meta-analysis. These scientists looked at all of the published LCAs on food, not just its production, but its packaging, its transportation, its consumption, everything, all the way through to end of life. And they synthesized and normalized, because all these studies are conducted in different ways, tried to put them all on the same level playing field and come up with and draw conclusions from that. And one of the conclusions, there's many conclusions, but one of the conclusions had to do with moving from current diets to plant-based diets. And it said that this one change could reduce land use by 76%, could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 49%, this is globally. Acidification, that's acidifying or causing lakes, rivers, and streams and rain to become acid, such that plants and animals can't live in that anymore, and it eats away at limestone buildings and that sort of thing, if you're familiar with acidification. Eutrophication, that's that nasty stuff I talked about that causes algal blooms and causes lakes to turn green and go hypoxic so that fish can no longer live in it. And water scarcity, which is a metric that has to do with not just that water is being consumed, but is it being consumed in a place that is experiencing scarcity because of high demand or low supply or both. The ability to reduce that water scarcity by almost 20% in the world. This one choice, again, this one choice that we all make every single day could have this much impact if done at scale. That is just phenomenal. I mean, this almost renders the rest of my presentation pointless because I feel like this just says it all. The only thing I'll have to say is that they didn't have any good graphics. Like, they had this super complicated, interesting graph, but it was like way too difficult to tease apart. So we'll probably share my slides in a PDF, and I have, as a good scientist does, references for every single one of these studies and links so that you can explore this stuff yourself if you'd like. So, as I mentioned, greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to kind of zoom in on these individual impacts. This was another life cycle assessment done, examining the food prints, so the greenhouse gas emissions of different kinds of diets, and going from heavy on the meat consumption through average to no beef to vegetarian to vegan. And there's an obvious trend. There's lower greenhouse gas emissions, essentially the lower on the food chain you eat. So the more plants you eat, the lower the greenhouse gas emissions in total. And I did some equivalency here. So a meat lover, as defined by this study, over their 80 years of life, their greenhouse gas emissions would be equivalent to 646 miles driven in the average passenger vehicle in the United States, whereas a vegan, over their 80-year life, would be 294. So that's less than half the greenhouse gas emissions over a lifetime from this one change. This isn't, and they always bike to work, and they, buy carbon offsets when they have to fly, and this and that. This is just food. Can have that much impact over a lifetime. Then I always get this question about food miles or eating locally. Well, I'm not, vegetarian or vegan, but I always eat locally. And I'm not saying that's bad, but if you want to talk about the relative comparison of potential of impact in a decision you make every day, number one, the first question I have for people who say, oh, I only eat locally, where do you get your coffee? Do we grow coffee here? Can coffee grow here? I don't think so. There are lots of things we don't grow here. So unless you are only eating what grows here, completely seasonally and limit yourself exactly to all of that at all times, you can't eat 100% locally all the time. Okay, let's say that you could. And I forget exactly how this study defined locally, if it was 100 miles or 500 miles, but essentially what it tried to quantify was how much of a greenhouse gas emission impact could you have on your personal food print by only eating locally. And the punchline was about 11%. But shifting to plant-based, your total impact could be, I want to say, well, from the previous slide, it was like 50%, right? And there's uncertainty around that. Some numbers are lower, some numbers are higher, but it's somewhere in the range of 50%. So you could have an 11% impact or a 50% impact. And 11% is only if you eat entirely locally, and including that coffee thing. And interestingly, what this study also pointed out is it's not just eating locally across the board of everything that you eat. There's actually more impact from animal products being transported over large distances than there are from other products, in part because of refrigeration and spoilage and all the processing steps that go on in between. So if you were to combine plant-based and eating locally and seasonally as much as you can, you'd have a multiplying effect, even more so than just like sourcing your animal products locally. So for anyone who already does eat plant-based, if you get this question, well, I'm a locavore, so that's better. 11%, 50%. 11%, 50%. There's the difference. Okay, what about grass-fed? I get this question all the time too. Well, I only eat grass-fed, free range, all of these words that actually have no definition. I know there's no legal definition, right? So I found a study, and I will acknowledge that the science is kind of all over the map on this one. What I will say is there's no definitive science that I have found, and scientific agreement among many studies, that grass-fed is necessarily lower carbon. This particular study made the argument that let's say, totally hypothetical, but let's say, everyone who currently eats meat in the world goes to grass-fed. No more of our commercial, agricultural, confined animal feeding operations, which are horrible. Let's just say they all go grass-fed. It would take so much more land to eat the same amount that people in the world are eating today. It would require a lot of land conversion, that deforestation thing I was talking about in the beginning that's leading to mass animal extinction. And a lot of that land conversion would also result in greenhouse gas emissions and a lot of other negative environmental impacts, such that eating grass-fed, in this case, would have higher greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts than eating conventional animal products as we do today. So grass-fed is not exactly a panacea. Again, I fully admit I am a scientist. I have not found scientific consensus on this, but this argument makes sense to me, that I know it takes more land. And in order for this to be a possible solution to reducing climate change, people would still have to eat less. Even if everyone switched to grass-fed, they'd still have to consume less so that we wouldn't eat up all the land, all the arable land. Right. Water. It's not just about climate change, it's about water. Water is a very scarce resource. Getting to this slide always reminds me to drink something. So there you go. I like to find, like I said, I like to find these calculators online, and I like to fill out who I am today, as I live today as a vegan, and then go back and change one thing, just what I eat, and see how it changes the results. And as you can see, me as I am today consumes about 1,000 gallons a day. Now this is not just the direct water that I drink or use in the house to clean things and flush toilets and all that kind of stuff. It's embodied water. It actually takes water to make everything. It takes water to make this widget, water to make this building. It takes water to make food, and it's not just the water that an animal drank or that irrigated a crop. There's water involved in everything. And so 1,000 gallons a day, that's a lot. But if all I change, again, is from vegan to a standard American diet, all of a sudden, 2,706 gallons of water a day. More than double. I think 1.5, right? Yeah, so vegan me in a year uses a half an Olympic swimming pool a year, whereas if it was me just as I am myself, but I ate animal products, it would take 1.5 Olympic swimming pools a day. Now again, multiply that over, it doesn't even have to be everyone in the world, everyone in Oregon. That's a lot of water. And, you know, this is in an increasingly water-scarce world that we're living in. So water is really important. And then a couple of years ago, there was this article in the New York Times talking about almonds and how it takes a gallon of water to get 1 almond. Oh, just heads exploded over this, right? Little did they realize, and I don't understand why this wasn't in the article, but it takes, on the order of 630, 50 gallons of water to make 1 hamburger. 1. That's enough to shower for, depending on how much you shower, half a year to a year of showering. 1 burger. So again, 1 gallon. I know it's 1 almond, and who just eats 1 almond, and a burger is a lot more food than 1 almond, but still. So to sort of put things on scale, I found this infographic, which I think is fairly useful. It doesn't actually have almonds on it, but I looked it up, and almonds are approximately equal to asparagus. And yeah, that's a big bubble, but the size of the bubble indicates how much water per ounce of food. This is per ounce of food. If I had infinite time and no job, I would take all of this information and I'd look up all of the calories, the protein, the fat, and all the other nutrients, and I'd normalize it on many different scales, and I'd create some sort of really interesting interactive bubble chart. But I don't have that much time. So someday I will have this much time, and I will do that to this graphic. Because, yeah, it would obviously be different sized bubbles if you normalized it per gram of protein or fat or calories or something. But this is just per sheer ounce of food. I will say, it's pretty obvious that the biggest bubbles are animal products. We've got beef, we've got pork, we got lamb. I'm not gonna lie, you know, one of the bigger bubbles is chickpeas. Yeah, chickpeas take a lot of water. Agriculture takes a lot of water. But part of the reason why the animal products are so big is that in order to get that ounce of beef, this is just an ounce, 1 ounce, 106 gallons of water, 1 ounce. An ounce is not very much. The portion size is supposed to be 4 ounces. That's the size of a deck of cards. Cut a deck of cards in 4. It takes 106 gallons to make that 1/4 of a deck of cards of beef. That's a lot of water. Part of the reason it takes so much water is that that cow during its life is not, is eating a bunch of other bubbles on the map. It's eating corn, soybeans, cottonseed meal, all kinds of stuff. And in commercial agriculture, it's eating really weird stuff like defective Skittles. So all kinds of things. Not to mention, keeping the animal through its life healthy and all the washing and the manure and the lagoons that are created and the water that is fouled as a result of other things that come out of the cow. So the next time somebody gives you guff about the almonds, remember, 630 gallons to make a hamburger. 630. That's a lot. Okay, nitrogen. I feel like I'm kind of belaboring the point a little bit. I like to find these calculators. I found one on nitrogen, which I think is super interesting. Nitrogen contributes to eutrophication. So if you've heard about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, or if you've heard about some lake or algal blooms that ruined a beach, turned everything green and smelly, and you couldn't swim in it, and it was potentially toxic and harmful, could give you skin rashes, could poison you, that sort of thing. That's eutrophication, and it comes from nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. And a large source of nitrogen and phosphorus runoff is agriculture. So commercial fertilizers, but also manure, can cause nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. And so, again, I go, the average United States person, the vegan United States person, I couldn't totally customize it personally exactly to me. But this one change, I'll read the numbers for you, leads to, the average US person from this red bar, that's the contribution of nitrogen from food, is 61 pounds a year. And if I switch it to vegan, it's 44 pounds. Interestingly, that's about on par, 43 pounds, with the average German. That's an average German who also eats meat. And that's probably in part because they eat less meat and other animal products, and also because they have very different agricultural standards than we do in the United States. So I fully acknowledge it's not only about what we choose to eat, it's also about the state of our agriculture in the United States and the regulations or the lack of regulations around things like nitrogen application and manure application and things like that. Okay. I feel like I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but there's study after study after study that looks at all kinds of interesting aspects of diet. So this one's about avoided deaths, right? And just to sort of make it not as complicated as this graph is, essentially we've got the sort of healthy diet, what's considered a healthy diet, including animal products. We've got a vegetarian diet, we've got a vegan diet. And now, remember, this is avoided death. So the bigger the bar, the better. We want to avoid death, right? And they looked at the whole world, developing countries, middle-income countries, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Mediterranean, South Asia, and East Asia. All these different regions of the world and all the diets that everybody is eating. And what effect, again, just removing the animal products incrementally from the diet has on avoided deaths. And the takeaway was, the less meat that people ate, the less people that died. And then finally, land. I think I talked about this in that Science magazine article, Science journal article. But essentially, this is another study that looked at everything from high animal consumption all the way down to the lowest. So we've got basic various levels of omnivory, ovo, lacto, so eating eggs, not eating eggs, and then vegan. And again, there's a dramatic drop-off in the amount of land that it takes to support the diet. And then I did another calculation for you. So over 80 years of life, a vegan would use 19 football fields worth of land to produce food, according to this study, whereas the average meat eater would use 111 football fields over that same time period. So 19 football fields worth of land, 111. 19. I mean, that's a really stark difference. Even if the uncertainty is like plus or minus 20, they still don't even overlap. You know? So even if we're wrong by almost an order of magnitude, we're still right. That makes sense. You know, even if that number isn't 19 football fields, even if it's 40, even if it's 50, it still doesn't come close to 111. I feel like I'm getting boring. This is a really interesting study, economics about opportunity costs. Can you tell I'm a bit of a nerd? Like, this is what I do in my free time. I read journal articles, and I'm like, ooh, opportunity cost. How many people in the room would say they have a good handle on what opportunity cost is? Kind of economics term, reaching way back into your, you know, maybe high school or college economics, or maybe grad school economics class. Or maybe some of you are economists, I don't know. But it's essentially sort of the cost of different ways of investing your resource. So a lot of times I talk about it in terms of money. What if I have $10? I could choose to go buy new shiny toy X today, or I could invest that money, and in 10 years, I'll have $20. And so the opportunity cost of me buying shiny toy X that is not going to be worth twice as much in 10 years, it's going to be worth like nothing in 10 years, the opportunity cost over that 10 years is that $10 I could have made by investing it. That's just really super high level example. But what this study looked at is all of the land and the resources that you would invest into making different food products like eggs, poultry, dairy, pork, and beef, and the opportunity cost of using all those resources to make that product versus making a nutritionally equivalent amount of plant-based product. So same nutritional value that you would get, same protein, same fat, same calories, of course no cholesterol, because you don't get cholesterol from plant-based foods. What's the opportunity cost of investing that in terms of dollars into the animal-based food versus the plant-based food? And the punchline was, let's say for beef, the opportunity cost was 96%. So imagine if somebody offered you two options, and one would give you 4% return on your investment, and the other would give you 96. Which one do you pick? Is that a choice? Now, of course, it's less severe with other ones. Eggs, it's 40%, poultry, it's 50%, and so on and so forth. But why have any opportunity cost at all? If you could get the nutritionally equivalent same amount of stuff from a plant and have no opportunity cost, why not do that? Makes sense to me. And then finally, fish. So this really has been bugging me lately. Everyone's talking about plastic. Everyone's like losing their mind over straws. They're like, oh, the poor marine creatures, and we got to stop using plastic straws because I care about the animals. And I'm like, if you care about the animals, stop eating fish. Not just because fish are an animal, but if you care about the charismatic megafauna like whales and sea mammals and turtles and that sort of thing, the number one source of this ocean plastic is fishing nets. Ghost floating plastic fishing nets. And not only are they just contributing to the vast amount of waste that's in our ocean, which has untold, unknown consequences, but it is literally choking the animals. So if people say, like, oh, we care about the turtles and I don't want them to get a straw up their nose, such a small, teeny weeny. I mean, every year there's, I don't know if it's every year, but with some frequency there's this like census that's done of ocean debris. And basically people go out on beaches and in boats and they pick up as much as they can and then they sort of tally what they find. And the amount that's attributable to like bottles and bottle caps and straws and that sort of thing is like 2% of the total. And that's where they get the 46% is the fishing nets from this census. 46%, 2%. 46%, 2%. I'm not saying go use plastic straws. I mean, who needs to use them? Just get a metal one or a bamboo one or a more durable plastic one and keep it in your bag and never use a single-use straw again. But if you really care about the animals and you care about the fact that there's plastic in our oceans, this is the bigger impact. If you notice a trend here, I'm trying to arm you with the science that tells you what choices that you make that'll have the actual impact that I believe that most of you in this room want to have, right? We all want to lower our burden on this planet so that we can all enjoy it and our kids and our grandkids and everyone on into infinitum can enjoy it just as we have, including the animals. right? These innocent creatures who are being affected and driven to extinction by our actions and our choices in this world, through no fault of their own. So, I don't want to belabor this too much. Just because I'm vegan, like I said, I'm not perfect, right? Still would take 2.4 Earths if everyone in the world lived like me. And I want to point out that there are perfectly vegan products that have significant environmental impacts, and one of them is palm oil. Is anyone in this room familiar with the impacts of palm oil? Okay, a fair amount, so I'm not going to belabor this point, but essentially, due to the expansion in demand for palm oil, for food products, but also for biofuels, there is increased deforestation in sensitive habitat. And deforestation, cutting down trees, releases carbon, degrades land, and is driving charismatic megafauna like the orangutan towards extinction. Sugar, not as sweet as you think. Sugar, a lot of it is produced and harvested. Right now, mechanical harvesting is becoming more prevalent, but about 50% or more of it is still harvested by hand, which requires first setting it on fire. Yes, I'm not kidding. This is a picture of a sugarcane field being set on fire. It, in part, removes a lot of the leaves that are sharp and not so nice to be walking past when you're trying to harvest the sugarcane by hand. And there's all kinds of detrimental impacts about sugarcane production, especially if it's being produced in sensitive habitats, if forest land is being cut down and converted into sugar plantations. This fire produces all of this smoke, produces runoff and particulate matter, which harms the humans and the non-human animals in the region. It's got impacts. I actually did a little comparison, a listicle for the Veg News online of the environmental impacts of different sweetener choices. If you'd like more information about that, I think I have a slide about it. And then I'll come back to plastic. A lot of stuff is wrapped in plastic. I will say this, from the standpoint of food waste, remember that was number 3 on the list. Using plastic packaging strategically to improve the longevity and shelf stability of foods will result in lower greenhouse gas emissions. It just will. It has properties that no other packaging material has. You can't package it in paper or glass or aluminum or other things and get these same qualities of food preservation and preserving the taste to ensure that the food makes it to where it needs to go when it actually gets eaten. That being said, I still think we have way too of a disposable culture where things are just thrown out or they're not designed with that intention of that packaging being able to go somewhere, or that product being able to be recovered and have a second life or a third life or be fixed, so that you can just keep using it and not have to throw it away and just get a new one. And so even as a vegan, I try to be very mindful about my plastic use because I fully acknowledge that plastics are hurting human animals, non-human animals in ways that we understand and in ways that we don't. Okay, so here's some information. As I mentioned, I did this listicle on Veg News if you'd like to know about the environmental impacts of different sweeteners, if you're curious. And I also have I did a podcast episode on Our Hen House, number 411, where I was basically interviewed about what I'm talking to you about today. So feel free to check that out. And yeah, some reflections. So in summary, there are a lot of life cycle assessment studies out there in journals, and there's only more. So when I speak at Northwest Veg Fest, which is not until October, right, there's probably going to be more. And so, like I said, I just created like 2 new slides just for you guys that I've never presented to anyone else before. So I'm sure there'll be more information to add by then. Some important questions. So if you're dedicated and you care about the environment, I challenge you to ask yourself, what can you do on a daily basis, every single day of your life? What choices are you making that can have the greatest impact? Not just an impact, not like a 2% impact. I mean like a 50% impact. And in full disclosure, I've been vegan for 19 years. So it's more than half my life now. So take a wild guess how old I am. But, I fully acknowledge that doing that alone is not enough, which is part of the reason why I'm here today to speak to you. I mean, other than some yummy snacks we're going to go well enjoy, it's not like I'm getting paid for this or something, right? I'm doing this because I want to spread this information and use the knowledge that I've been given and this ability to read scientific articles and translate them to the masses to help more people understand what I understand. Right, and like I said, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I hope I've given you some interesting things to think about. And I'm happy to take questions, either here or I don't know if we want to transition to snacks and informal questions, but if anyone has any burning questions they want to ask me, feel free to raise your hand.
Well, I can speak on that. Okay. Frances Moore LePay, I read her book in the 70s.
That was the reason I went vegetarian.
Yeah.
I read her book.
That really influenced me to change my diet, and I thought she had compelling arguments also. So
yes.
Why didn't people listen to her?
Yeah, why didn't people listen to Frances Moore LePay in the 70s? So glad you brought that up. So when I was 14, I found a dog-eared copy of her book in a library sale for $0.25. I think it was like the 3rd edition or something. And I read it. And one thing, and this was before climate change was like a word. This was before like that was like on people's minds, right? One thing I remember reading in her book was that to raise one beef cow to slaughter weight took enough water to float a United States aircraft carrier. Mind blown. 14-year-old mind blown. And I was like, not eating beef anymore. That's done. I still messed with chicken and fish for a little while after that until I realized, like, wait a minute, no, that doesn't make any sense. What are you doing? And then when I went to college, you know, just went vegan. It was just like, forget it. Why hasn't this trickled down? I don't know. I am heartened. I take a lot of solace in the fact that this is making it into mainstream journalism, into the fact that plant-based alternatives like Beyond Meat has its IPO just last week and has a valuation of over 240%. I take great comfort in that it's finally catching on. I take great comfort in that just a few years ago, the percentage of Americans that self-identified as vegan was 1%, but last year it was 6%. That's a big change, only over a couple of years, and more people are including more and more plant-based options because they want to be healthy, because marketing research is showing that millennials and Gen Z or Zillennials or whatever they're called, apologies if any of you are one, I don't think they've quite decided what to call that generation yet, increasingly are concerned with the products that they choose, and especially the food products, with its social and environmental impacts. What I then challenge people to do is actually make sure that the claims on the product or whatever it is that they're saying is actually substantiated. Because like I said, there's a lot of this grass-fed, you know, local stuff that's like, okay, yeah, it might be better incrementally, but not that much. Honestly, I think 11% is in the realm of uncertainty. So it could be 11%, it could be -20. Who knows? So to answer your question, I don't know. I don't know why it's taken this long. I don't know why I wasn't born into a world that already knew this and put it into practice. And I will say the other thing that's really important is that the developing world not repeat our mistake. I would love for people who are gaining access to more food options to skip over the animal products entirely and go right to these awesome plant-based products, because there's so many of them and it's so awesome. And that's why companies like Beyond and Just and Impossible are moving into Asia and India and these other countries. So I take a lot of solace in that too. Yeah, no problem. You, sir.
Is your slideshow available on the web?
It will be. I've given it to Keith, and I guess however it is that you found out about this event, you'll probably be able to get it through there. I've also given this talk before. If you Google my name with Berkeley Vegan Earth Day, you can see a recording. It's an older version, so it won't have all these up-to-date slides. But yes. Yes.
You're probably aware that the Oregon legislature is developing a bill to put a price on carbon emissions, HB 2020.
Right.
Well, they're really kind of taking models from jurisdictions around the world that are all right pricing carbon. But to my knowledge, none of these jurisdictions is including either the agriculture sector or the forest sector.
Agreed.
Why aren't they modeling agriculture so they can, find out how much carbon comes from an average cow?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there has been science done on that, but I will agree that a lot of the carbon legislation that I've seen, it talks about major industry, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think part of it is it's really easy to target, like, here's a facility, it's got a smokestack, it's burning fossil fuels, and it's really obvious. It's what's called a point source. It's not diffuse. Tailpipes are diffuse, but you can still kind of calculate it because you know how much gas is being, produced and purchased, so you know how much is being burned. Agriculture is all over the place. And I could see from the standpoint of an Oregon legislator, if they're trying to target like just what's going on in Oregon, that's one thing. You could try to put a cost of carbon on the agriculture that's going on specifically here, but we get our food from all over the world. I mean, I guess there would have to be like an import tariff or tax or something of the products coming into the state of Oregon based on their carbon emissions, which is going to be incredibly different based on where it was produced, how it was produced, and even when it was produced. So it's not a good answer, but my guess would be A, incredibly politically unpopular, B, incredibly difficult to assess fairly evenly across the board, and then C, lack of awareness. That's my guess. I don't know, I'm not an Oregon legislator. Yes?
I sort of despair on this issue. It seems like there's a lot of denial, muffled. If you look at the environmental organization, I can't find one that would say ESG is related to environmental degradation.
Yeah.
And when I look at very intelligent people, and they don't recognize the need connection to the environment, something's got lost in there. You can't go from A to B without making that connection. And you see a lot of people too. So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and people are not willing to change.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's also a bit of noise in the calculations. So, for example, often I see these pie charts of global emissions, and it's cut out into energy, transportation, buildings, and then there's like this small sliver that's other, right? And agriculture's like not even on the pie chart. And I think part of the reason is because it takes energy and it takes transportation and to a lesser extent infrastructure and that sort of thing to do agriculture. So if you were to try to like parse that out from all those different pieces of the pie, I am certain it would take up a large slice. How exactly you slice it, I've seen 25%, I've seen 50% of the pie of total greenhouse gas emissions in the world, but it really depends on how you count things. And so I think, again, because it's messy and difficult and unpopular, it gets left off the chart. And yet again is another reason why I go out and I do these things and I talk to audiences like you guys, I talk to audiences at work, or I talk to anyone who will listen, because, and I try to emphasize, again, on an individual daily basis, which one of those sectors are you actually able to influence? Can you, on a daily basis, have a significant impact on our overall greenhouse gas emissions from our energy grid? No. You can personally try to use less energy and personally try to buy renewable energy and personally advocate for that. But is it going to have as much of an impact as what you choose to put on your plate every day? No, it's not. Yeah, in the back.
I have a corporate question.
Sure.
A couple of decades ago, I went to a sustainability workshop that the Natural Step also put on. They partnered with a group here in Portland. And the Natural Step was a corporate model, and so a lot of apparel companies, like Nike adopted it, and North Thompson, two that I remember off the top of my head. So my question is, like, I haven't heard about the Natural Step for a while. Is there a model like that for these corporations, for these, the point the smokestack? Like, is there a focus? Because the natural step, I think that's what are you familiar with?
Yeah, I've heard of it. It still exists.
Okay, because that was a pretty comprehensive plan.
Right. Yeah, things like that exist. There are, corporate level action plans and strategies. There's something called CDP, formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project. They rebranded as just CDP because they actually don't only do carbon anymore, which gets global companies to report, not just global companies, actually any company, to report their greenhouse gas emissions and their water consumption and their effect on forests and supply chain and everything like that, which is great because getting them to report about it and to report about the risks, especially economic risks related to climate change, gets them to think about it, gets that information out in the world where other people can see it and they can influence their supply chain. There's other things like the Global Reporting Initiative. There's another one called GrassFed. There's lots of different initiatives out there at the corporate level to try to get a handle on and increase transparency and even rate and sort of compete amongst industries on who's got the better CDP score. Who got an A this year, and why didn't we get an A this year, and what are we going to do next year to get one, because our competitors got an A. And to some extent, the customers care about it, and to a large extent, the investors care about it, and the stockholders and the shareholders care about it. So I hope that answers your question. But yes, that's part of my job. That's part of what I do. So these things do still exist, and there's other models that also try to attach an economic cost to the company and its business and its operations as a result of environmental impacts, and not just carbon, but definitely increasingly more things like water and land and waste. Yeah. All right. Well, if you have more questions and you want to just ask me casually over, snacks and a coffee or something, we can retire. But thank you so much for listening.